If you played back in Wrath of the Lich King Classic, then you know that Blizzard sped up the rate at which you could get hold of both Valanir and Shadowmourne. They've already mentioned that the legendaries in Cataclysm will also be sped up because of the increased cadence of the expansion, but how exactly should they do it? Should there be a difference between 10 and 25 man? Should there be a difference between normal and heroic? How fast is too fast? And do we want to be running Firelands every week when Dragon Soul is current content? Well, while I can't answer for everybody, I do want to break all of those points down, and actually something you might not be aware of is that you can start the legendary quest line right now in preparation for Firelands. Granted, all you can really do is a couple of running around bits and go and grab some stuff from a vendor, but at least you're ready for when Firelands launches, even though you might be getting ready a little bit early. So firstly, should there be a difference between 10 and 25 man? Now there absolutely should, in my opinion. Of course you should be able to make staves quicker in 25 man than you can 10 man, and if it's not about making it quicker, you should just be able to make more at the same time, which, spoiler alert, as we get through the video, is going to be exactly what I personally would like to see. Should there be a difference between normal and heroic? Now again, as we go through the video, you'll start to notice that there's lots of looting quests as part of this legendary quest line. Much like Shadowmourne, where you needed to get the shards, there's a couple of different steps where you need to loot things from the mobs inside Firelands. Now, I definitely think there should be more of these drops from heroic, or at least more reliable amounts of drops from heroic than normal. I also don't think it should take a ridiculously longer amount of time in normal versus heroic, but it definitely should take a little bit longer, because those that are pushing the hardest content obviously should get the best rewards. And on the basis everyone gets the same reward, the only way to get it better is by it being faster. How fast is too fast? Well, on the basis that we already know roughly what the roadmap for Cataclysm Classic is, we know Rage of Firelands should be around October 2024. Now, while we don't know whether it's the beginning of the month, the middle of the month, the end of the month, that might not seem like a big deal to many of you, but when it comes to actually making legendaries ready for the last raid of the expansion, then that is actually quite important, because every week matters. But then Dragon Soul's going to be following in January, so it's only 3 to 4 months absolute maximum between Firelands and Dragon Soul launching. So how fast is too fast? Well, as we break down roughly how many casters most raid groups run with, and how many of these staves are actually going to be needed across raid groups, I think that question's going to answer itself. As for do we want to be running Firelands every week when Dragon Soul is out, I would actually say no. When we go back to Wrath of the Lich King, it was an absolute nightmare constantly going back to Ulduar all the way through Tok just to get people Valanir finished off, or even some of like the 252 trinkets. Back during TOGC, I was raiding in 2 or 3 different raid groups, and once you've got to the end of TOGC, you've just finished a nice tribute to immortality maybe, and then the raid leader says, right, off to Ulduar for a skip run. No one was happy about that. And honestly, after 3 or 4 months of sitting in Firelands, I also don't think raid teams are going to be particularly happy about going back to get people their staff. Of course, for a few weeks during Dragon Soul, I'm sure at the start people are not going to mind, but it will wear a bit thin if we're still trying to get 3 or 4 different staves during Dragon Soul. Like, that will just get very tiring. So I would say no, the aim should be that we get enough of these staffs made during Firelands itself, so we don't really feel forced to go back during Dragon Soul. Everyone's opinion could vary on that, that's just mine. Well, first, in case you're not overly familiar with what I'm talking about, what is the legendary in Firelands? So first, let's have a quick look. So Dragonwrath Taragosa's Rest is the weapon in question. It's a really unique legendary because it's more than just useful for doing damage, it's also a mount. So this is actually going to stay relevant for pretty much the rest of the time you play WoW. So it's not like where you got Shadowmourne and then you went in your first Stonecore and replaced it. This you'll use as a mount possibly for the rest of the game. So that's really cool, and also a reason why more than just the DPS are going to want to get it. Most of your healers, well, most people that are able to use a staff will probably want to try and get it just from a collection perspective. Now, the weapon itself in terms of output, it is going to be every caster's absolute bis for the rest of the expansion. So you're not going to replace it in Dragon Soul because the proc is absolutely insane. So when you deal damage, you have a chance to gain the Wrath of Taragosa, duplicating the harmful spell. Lots of people love the fact that with Shaman, it actually works with your Mastery as well, which is Elemental Overload. So when your Mastery procs, so you get an extra free Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, or Lava Burst, that extra attack can also proc the weapon, which is obviously insane. You can get like 4 or 5 lava bursts out just from it like chaining back to back. The thing is, back in the day, Blizzard actually tried to balance this pretty well and make it relevant for every caster DPS. So while most people will say that it should go to a Fire Mage or an Ellie Shaman first because they get the most value out of it, that doesn't mean it's not useful for things like Affliction Warlock, Shadow Priest, Boomkin, like literally any caster you can think of, because it also has an effect for damage over time spells. So when your damage over times are on the target, it will have Wrath of Taragosa, which duplicates dot ticks instead of duplicating direct damage attacks. So let's say you had an Immolate on the target. When your Immolate ticks, it's got a chance of Wrath of Taragosa ticking as well, which always does arcane damage. So you won't end up with 2 Vampiric Touches on the target or 2 Shadow Word Pains on the target. It's just individual ticks that duplicate. But overall, rather than sitting here and worrying about who it should go to first, whoever your top big dick swinging pumper casters are in your group, give it to them first. So just briefly, if you know you're probably in the run-in for the weapon and you haven't started the quest already, well, if you've cleared all tier 11 just on normal, doesn't even need to be heroic, you can get a quest either inside Gromash Hold or from the Wizard's Sanctum in Stormwind. This quest will just send you over to Caverns of Time, and this is to get the quest started, so you can actually get to the very first part of the collection quest inside Firelands. If you don't do this, you will get a pop-up quest when you're in Firelands anyway when you kill a Molten Lord, but then that means you have to leave the raid and then get summoned back once you've handed it in and flown around, and obviously it's a pain. When as long as you've cleared tier 11, you can do it now. So go and see Zura Dormi in Gromash Hold or Corridormi atop the Wizard's Sanctum. Once you've got the quest, it is going to cost you 9,000 gold because you need to buy 3 Sands of Times from Yasmin in Oldham. Obviously you don't need to rush with this because you got 25 Embers to get inside the raid first, so you can just pick these up at a later date, but for the sake of 9k, you can just go and pick them up now. So now when it comes to how it could be made faster, I want you to strap yourself in because this is probably going to be quite numbers heavy, but I'm hoping that it's going to make sense and you'll be like, well, actually, yeah, this is exactly what Blizzard should do, and then we can all tag them on Twitter and they can do it. Because I honestly think after putting a lot of thought into exactly how this should happen, and a lot of research even into what sort of compositions we have in raids, I do think this is probably one of the better ways. But of course, if you've got an idea or a better way, put it in the comments. I do read them all, good and bad, so yeah, just let me know. I'm not going to talk through the entire quest line, just the relevant steps that take place in Firelands and these drops from bosses. The first stage of this is to actually make the 378 version of the staff, which requires Eternal Embers. It's worth noting that for some weird reason, back in original Cataclysm, Ragnaros didn't drop quest items. So the Elemental Embers, or even the Seething Cinders that we're going to need later on, they cannot be obtained from Ragnaros. So that should be a change straight away to help speed up the acquisition. And this is the perfect place to actually use Ragnaros to drop extras to cut down on the amount of weeks each step takes. That will make more sense as we carry on. So originally, to get the Eternal Embers, on 10-man you would get 0 to 1 on normal and 0 to 1 on heroic, whereas in 25-man you would get 1 to 3 on normal and 1 to 3 on heroic. Now I would have both 10 and 25-man heroic drop 3 per boss, a guaranteed 3. The difference in 25-man is you get 2 lots of 3, so you're completing 2 staves at a time in the time it takes to complete 1 in 10-man. And you're probably like, well, that math don't work out, fat boy. You need it 150% faster, not just 100% faster, because you've got 15 extra players, not just 10. Well, think about it like this. In 10-man, you're going to have 2 tanks and let's say 2 healers for most bosses. This leaves 6 DPS. If you said 4 of them are ranged and 1 of those is a hunter, you only have 3 people that would need it for actual DPS. Of course, you could say there'd be a Disc Priest as well. I had to mention that, or our Disc Priest McNulty would probably shout at me. But I am talking for actual damage dealing purposes. If you're a 25-man, you'll still have 2 tanks, but now you're going to have 5 healers, leaving 18 DPS. Let's say half of those are ranged, so that's 9, and 2 of those are hunters. Now you're actually down to 7 people. To spot check how true these made up numbers would be, I had a look on Warcraft logs, and actually 7 casters in a raid is pretty average. Of course, there are some speedrunning guilds and pass guilds where this varies, but just looking at your run-of-the-mill guild clearing 13 of 13 heroic, it was pretty standard to see 7 casters that are all capable of using the staff. The minimum I was seeing most of the time was 6, so simply making 25-man make 2 staves at a time instead of 1, to me, makes the most sense. There isn't anything skewed enough there to make people want to run loads of 10-man splits instead of 25, because actually, you're just having to do more runs if you're doing 10-man. Both the 10 and 25 man group, assuming full clears each week, will finish the first phase of the staff on the exact same day. The only difference is the 25 man have got 2 finished. Look back at how it was before. Technically, the 25 man could get pretty unlucky and a 10 man could get lucky, and over the course of several weeks, both groups could only have 1 staff. But of course, the 25 man are probably closer to finishing their second than the 10 man group, who's probably just started on their second one. But at the end of the day, both groups at a certain point in time have still got the same amount of staves. That is assuming bad luck on one side and good luck on the other. So if you have 25 man heroic groups getting 2 staves on the same day, that feels really rewarding, and rewarding enough to probably want to stick to doing 25 man rather than running 27 different 10 man splits to get loads of staves in 5-6 weeks, however long it's going to take. Now the big one, have Dragonwrath drop 7 Embers. What? Yep, 7 Embers. What this means is, on Heroic for the first 6 bosses, you're going to get 18 Embers in total. If you now kill Dragonwrath, you will finish step 1 in 1 reset, which based on how long this quest chain for the staff is, just to get a 378 item level staff, which by the way, obviously you can buy a 378 caster weapon off the auction house from like a trash drop. It seems about right to me. And also, if you was to compare this back to Shadowmourne, you could get both Bloods in a week and 25 Primordial Saranites just buying them or trading them or using emblems to get them. And you could also get Shadow's Edge in a week. So this would sort of line up with how Shadowmourne worked. So you're probably like, well, Scott, you're talking a lot about Heroic, but what about normal? Well, I would have normal stick to the historic 1 to 3 for each boss like Heroic used to be, but have that for normal now instead. And then have Dragonwrath drop, say, 5 to 7 Embers. So normal is a little more RNG on how long it takes, but ultimately it's still going to be a hell of a lot faster than it was back in the day, and the same would apply. 10 man normal will make 1 staff at a time, 25 man will get 2 lots of the Embers drop so they can make 2 at a time. So at the end of the first week, or maybe second week if you're doing normal, 25 man are going to have 2 378 staves, and 10 man are going to have 1. Now on to the next step. You need to get a charged crystal from 4 encounters. These are Shanox, Beftalak, Rylith, and Alishrazor. Now you don't actually have to kill the bosses, so it's worth noting that for speed, if you're a 25 man guild, you could just go in on 10 man and get the charged crystals outside of your normal raid time. So when you get in 25 man, you've already got the crystals to kill the extra boss. Basically, think of any of the big mechanics that happen on these 4 bosses. You'll need to charge the crystals with those abilities. And then all you're doing is picking the crystal up off the floor. For 25 man, it should be as simple as both people on the quest can loot the crystal off the floor no matter who dropped it down, and for 10 man it would remain the same. Then you need to kill an extra boss that's in a hidden part of Firelands. From him you loot a branch that makes the first epic version of the staff. Just a minor detail, because I gotta be honest, I'm not 100% sure whether it's the case or not, because I've never been in a group where 2 of us are working on this part at the same time. But of course, from this extra boss where it drops the branch that you need to hand in for the quest, anybody who's on this part of the quest should be able to loot it, and it's not 1 per week like the Bloods were in Icecrown Citadel. Now that bit I would like to see not having to be done in order. So where charging the crystal, killing the extra boss is what actually gives you the staff, so your very first 378 staff. The next part of the quest line I would like to be able to see done as long as you've handed in the 25 Embers from step 1. So for the 25 Embers, the quest is called the All-Seeing Eye, and as long as you've got that quest complete, how I'd like to see it happen is cinders can now start dropping from bosses. So Seething Cinders are what you're going to need, and historically on normal difficulty on 10 man they dropped 18 to 23, on heroic 23 to 26, on 25 man normally it was 48 to 55, and on 25 man heroic it was 55 to 66. Now this is one of the longer sections because you need 1,000 of these, which is exactly why I'd like to see when the Eternal Embers are finished you can instantly start getting the cinders without worrying about having to do what I would compare to the infusions. You didn't need to do the infusions when you was collecting Shadowfrost shards, obviously in ICC for Shadowmourne. So this is kind of that step. So you can go back and do the infusions, which would be charging the crystals in Firelands. This means if you happen to be only doing Dragonwrath on normal but the other 6 on heroic, you might need 1 boss in the second week to finish your Embers quest. So you can just half out, hand in and get summoned back and instantly start on the next collecting portion of these Seething Cinders. So how I'd like to see it is we'll use those top end numbers again. For heroic, saying 66 Seething Cinders per boss and leave normal as RNG. I would actually have them going from 48 to 66 per boss for normal. So you have the low end of normal from the historic numbers and the high end of heroic historic numbers. This means it's really random. Normal groups could get really lucky and get 60, between 60 and 66 from every boss. Or they could get unlucky and just get like 50 from each boss. But this is where we can use Ragnaros again to make up the numbers. So if each of the first 6s drop in 66, have Ragnaros drop 104. That is a very specific number for a very specific reason. And you might even think it sounds like too much, but let's not forget, Ragnaros on Heroic is pretty much 2 to 3 bosses in one anyway, because it's a really long fight and it's a really hard fight. But this would mean if you clear all 14 bosses on Heroic over 2 weeks, the Seething Cinders portion is done. So this would total 3 weeks of full clears doing 7 of 7 Heroic to get to this point, and the worst part is still to come. So at this point of completion, you would now get a 391 version of the staff, which, let's not forget, this is now only the same eye level as non-Ragnaros heroic loot. So taking 3 weeks to get a single weapon that's the same eye level as what most of your guildmates will already be using isn't anything crazy. Just to put it into perspective on how long this section would take for people clearing normal, if you said they averaged 55-ish per boss and had Ragnaros drop between, let's say, 66 and 104, so 104 guaranteed, so maximum number on heroic. On normal they can get between 66, which is the highest end of all the other bosses, up to 104 of heroic. So again, you'll get lucky on normal and get a decent amount. It's going to take an extra week maximum, but remember, so will the previous stage. So normal is always going to take a few weeks maximum in total by the time we finish the whole staff quest line, which a few weeks extra just farming normal, I think that's pretty fair. And that's assuming full normal. Obviously, if they're going to be doing some heroic, then it's going to speed it up. It might only be 1 week longer if, all they're not doing is Ragnaros each week. So now, at this point, we'd be 3 weeks in, and we'd be starting on the siphoning. For the final Firelands related part, you need to use your upgraded staff, so it's important that during the Seething Cinders weeks, you have completed all the RP, charged the crystals, got your first staff, and all that jazz. So by the time you collect your final cinders, you're ready to upgrade the staff to the 391 version. The reason this is important is because the 391 version of the staff has got a use effect on it that you need for this next quest. So this is to siphon smouldering essences from the bosses. Again, historically, this did not include Ragnaros, but as a great way to be able to speed it up, we're using Ragnaros again. Now, the whole goal of this section would be complete it on your second clear, because it's in 2 parts. Firstly, you need to siphon 250 essences, and secondly, you need to kill Ragnaros without dying, and it's with a bit of a twist as well, because you'll have a debuff called Rage of Ragnaros, and you'll need to be focus healed, because if you die during the encounter, you can't loot the heart. You also knock people back, and yeah, it's just a bit of a nightmare, but the good news is, if you're killing Ragnaros on heroic, it doesn't matter, because you don't even need to deal with the mechanic. When Ragnaros dies, the heart spawns in the lava pool where the boss usually is, and for it to spawn on normal, the person with Rage of Ragnaros debuff has to be alive. For heroic though, the debuff doesn't actually go out, but the heart will be lootable. This of course is good news because it means you don't need to sacrifice heroic loot for a safer Ragnaros kill to get a staff finished. And now for the boring part, the numbers. Historically on 25 man it was 9 to 11 on heroic and 7 to 9 on normal. I would put normal as 9 to 11 and have heroic as a guaranteed 13. The reason I'd have this as 13 is because you would allow Ragnaros to be siphoned, giving a guaranteed 100 essences. I mean, look at him, he's a big boy. Surely he's got 100 smouldering essences worth in him. And then I would just have 50 for normal because, yeah, it needs to be a tad longer if you're just doing normal Ragnaros. This would mean on the second clear of being on this section, doing full heroic, you'd get your last smouldering essences from the second major domo kill, ready to get the heart from Ragnaros on the second Ragnaros kill. This would total 5 weeks per staff on 10 man and per 2 staves in 25 man. And this is assuming full heroic clears. On the basis it's around 3 to 4 months maximum of Firelands according to the roadmap. Of course, depending on how early or late, again, it happens in the month, it could just be around 3 months. You can get most, if not all, of your caster DPS as staff before Dragon Soul without doing splits or anything fancy. Obviously, the big boy guilds doing multiple splits will absolutely be rolling in them before Dragon Soul actually launches. But even in a 10-man, it's only 7 bosses. You could do 10-man splits as a strict 10-man guild and work on 2 staves. So every 5th week, you're going to get 2. I think 5 weeks to get one is about right. Any longer, and on the basis of the amount of people that actually want this staff, it's just going to be too long. So what do you think? Is there anything you would change? Would 5 weeks be too long? Would it be too short or just right? If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, subscribe, check me out streaming on Kick. Consider joining the channel as a member to join the guys that have been struggling to speak. Join the guys that have been scrolling down on the screen. And I'll see you on the next one.